He is playing 23.1 minutes per game, averaging 14.2 points, 3.9 rebounds, 4.3 assists, mostly off the bench. 46.8, 44.4, 71.4 splits, 54.8 effective field goal percentage, 7.3 BPM. Currently, no ceilings has him at 14. ESPN has him at 16. Bleacher Report at 10. The Athletic at 15, Yahoo at 10, Tankathon at 12, average stock price of 12.8. So, Albert, is Rob Dillingham's stock price too high, too low, or is it just right?
I think, he probably has the most volatile stock price of anybody so far. As you mentioned, Corey, for our first one, we didn't even have him on our big board. I had him in the hundreds, I believe, initially to start, just because Corey, just with everything that you said in the intro, he was a guy that, to put it plainly, he was a guy I was terrified of. He was a guy that was going to a big school that had some guards, and I was really curious to see what it was going to look like. And from what we've seen from the beginning of the season, things have been pretty damn encouraging in terms of his play. And so his stock price being in that 12 area, I think is totally fair considering everything, like not just, his meteoric rise, right? Not just in our board, but others as well. But I think if you consider everything, the type of player that he is, and as I said, his draft stock has been volatile. It doesn't mean it's going to stop being that way. He's had a good start to the season. Doesn't mean he can't have a rough end to the season as well. But when we're talking about where he is right now, from what I've seen, I think that's a pretty fair stock price.
I do too, especially in this class, right? Where it's like, I think at a certain point in the lottery, teams are going to be like, hey, not a ton of guys who are worth like a big time swing, but maybe Rob Dillingham is like, maybe there's a guy who can be your lead guard, or maybe it's worst case, like he's a guy who could be a gunner off the bench. But like you said, I do think there is volatility to his draft stock. While I think this season has mostly been positive for him, and I think he shifted the perspective based on how he plays and the nuance, and he's more than a gunner. He certainly showed that so far early on this season. But like, I think back to Sharif Cooper, and like, this is a guy who we were all shocked. Like, he dropped to the second round, right, at the time of the draft, which we were, attending in person. And, that so far has looked like, I guess, the right decision, right? Like, Sharif has not really gotten an opportunity in the league. Now, different players, like, Rob definitely has a better reputation as a shooter than Sharif did. But at the end of the day, it might come down to simply like small guard. And like, our NBA team's going to want to invest in that, especially one that does have questions throughout his game, even if there are some really high highs. So let's get into that game. Let's start it out. I think if you're going to talk Rob Dillingham, I mean, you have to start with the shooting, right? Like that's kind of where we got to go. Because I think that ultimately that's something that he's going to be able to come in, and you can confidently be like, at the very least, like he's a shooter. He's got a smooth stroke, and he doesn't have to have the ball in his hands. You can play him off ball. He will be capable of knocking down these catch and shoot looks. And I think, with the way the game is headed with those big jumbo creators, you need to be able to play off ball. And I think that Rob can most certainly do that. He's shooting 44.4% from three so far this year.
No, 100% agree, Corey. I think, well, first off, that number you just read off, that's 44.4% per game on 4.1 attempts per game. Not super high volume, but also not super low volume. I think it's a pretty decent, good volume for him. As you've mentioned, he can do it off the catch, but also a guy who is really comfortable shooting it off the dribble. A guy who really enjoys that part of his game. But just if we get down to just the mechanics of it all, I definitely like his jump shot a lot. Gets it off pretty easy, looks fluid, looks pretty repeatable. Just a guy that is what he likes to do. There's some people, when you see them, I don't know, you meet someone and then you see them in their element, and then they make a lot more sense as a person, if that makes sense. I think, Corey, if it's we just meet you on the street and then we see you at some fine dining restaurant, eating with your wife, enjoying a beautiful meal, it makes more sense. Some guys just look different in different contexts. And I think with Rob, when he's cooking offensively and he's getting his shot off and he's comfortable doing his thing, it looks great. It looks like what he was meant to do. He's an offense first player is what I'd say. I don't think that's a stretch by any means. But when it comes to the shooting, for sure, I like it a lot. Corey, what you mentioned before about the small guard thing, I think is such an interesting conversation because we just did a pod recently on Tyler Kolek, small guard, right? You mentioned Sharif Cooper, small guard. We've done Peyton Pritchard in the past, small guard. And it's so hard, and recently in New York, there's been big conversation on Twitter, obviously, with the Becky Hammond comments talking about a guy like a Jalen Brunson, also a small guard. But it really does depend, right? I think the reason why Dillingham and his stock might be volatile is because he's small, but he's also small, if that makes sense. And what I mean by that is
Yes.
he's small in height, but also his body, he's gained muscle, to his credit, right? But he's
Mhm.
still not like an overwhelmingly tough, bruising type of guard like a Jalen Brunson is. Jalen Brunson is listed at 6'2", but I think even that's a stretch. But the way that he plays with his bruising style, right? He's got a big, sturdy body. He loves
Girth.
banging into people, girth, right? A sturdiness to him that makes sense at that height. And Dillingham's going to be interesting to watch because, as I mentioned before, he's a guy that really likes to shoot the ball and he has a nice looking stroke, but he is a small guard, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think like when you look at Jalen Brunson, right, he's got like a very sturdy frame
Right.
and like lower body,
Center of gravity. Yeah.
And yeah, so like I think, and is like, I don't know, is Jalen Brunson 6 foot even? Like he might not even be 6 foot. I don't know. Like, but because he is strong enough, and I mean, I think Rob definitely has craft to his game. Maybe not as crafty as Jalen Brunson does, and Jalen's also a lefty, and 5% advantage to lefties. But it was also like a tough path for Jalen Brunson. This is a guy who was super accomplished coming out of college, ended up being a very early second round pick. And it took him a few years in the league to get the reputation to earn the opportunity to become what he's become. And like, who knows, in a different situation, if you even get that opportunity, opportunities are not always there, even if they should be sometimes. So I definitely think the small guard thing, and this is going to be the case for both of these guys,
right?
Right, that we're covering today. But I think in particular with Rob, because he is a little bit slighter of frame, there's that worry because we'll talk about his defense or whatever. Like that's ultimately the worry is, okay, you have to be good enough offensively that the defense will live with the repercussions. And we're watching a lot of really impressive clips. I mean, this is an insane, like in transition, stop on a dime,
so hard. Yeah,
pull, crazy, right? But it does come down to with Rob too, like it's not always the best shot selection. And while I think he's done a way better job, I think I saw something where it's like Cal says that he gets like 3 iffy decisions a half, like that you just got to live with it. And I actually love that. I think that that's like a super appropriate way to like coach a guy like this, where if they're getting too crazy, you can yank them, but you do give them a little bit of freedom to kind of live how they've always lived. And like, but like this shot here, another one, quick pull in transition. It's not that you hate a quick pull in transition for a shooter like Rob, shooting 44% on the year, but it's like this one in particular, it's like it's contested. Like you don't need that at this point, right? Like you can get that look whenever you want. So I think that's the balance that Rob needs to continue to find. And I thought that he was doing it a little bit more earlier in the year, and he's reverted a little bit more recently. And I think that's reflected in the numbers. So I want to read you his first 7 games in November. He shot 53, 53, 75, and he had 40 assists to 9 turnovers.
Right.
Just played a super nuanced game, mature. Over his last 4 games in December, 38, 27, 67 splits, 7 assists to 9 turnovers. So as Kentucky gets into conference play and you're starting to see tougher opponents on a night-to-night basis, this is what we're going to have to see with Rob, because I mean, the dude has a lot of talent. He's a versatile shot maker. Not only is he like a catch and shoot guy, this is a guy that can move around the court, and he can knock down shots off movement. So there's like a lot of valuable offensive skills and in particular shooting. But if the shot's not dropping, is the value going to be there? What else is he doing to make up for that? Because we know that even, I think I've been impressed with his defense this year. I'll go as far as saying that. Sure. He's still the size that he is. And, we'll break that down a little bit more a little later, but that's kind of the uphill battle that he's got. And right now he's struggling. So like, what else can he rely on? Early on, he was a playmaker. Now he's kind of reverting back.
Corey, I think it's really interesting, the point that you brought up, because you brought it up while you were playing some clips of him playing against UNC, because I thought that game was a really interesting like case study for Rob Dillingham, because he ended up, in that game having like 17 points, right? It's, you just look at the box score and you go, oh, a guy had 17 points against, one of the major programs in the country. And they won that game, right? From what I remember. And it's like, okay, good for him, right? And that you kind of write that down as a W. But it's interesting that you brought up this part of the conversation during these clips, because I thought that game was kind of a weird game for him. I thought there were some real moments where I was a little confused, because Corey, the reason why he wasn't on our board and was a guy that we weren't really thinking about before the season started was because of the OTE stuff, the high school stuff. Like and I think I told you this in private, but watching him last year reminded me of guys like Julian Newman and like GOYs on TikTok. Like just some of the crazy dribbling a million times into a wildly contested jump shot was just not my favorite stuff. But then, like you mentioned, Corey, that first month or two in college, he did show a different side of his game that we completely just were not expecting at all. And then the funny thing though is, Corey, as I watch Rob, there's still times where he'll make a shot and it's like, that's not too different from what you were doing last year.
Yeah.
To give you an example,
right
like the one
here.
the one right here, like when you see him take this shot and his legs are like crossing in the air and stuff, and you're just like, what is this? Right. But he goes in and then you find yourself like really questioning yourself, like, okay, am I being too harsh? How do I feel about this guy? Like he's just like completely twisting in the air, but the shot goes in. And the thing is, Corey, like I think once again, and I started with this and I want to continue to emphasize this, we are much higher on him now, but we could end up being much lower on him later, is kind of how I continue to think about Rob Dillingham. But something that I did want to mention, Corey, as we were kind of talking about the small guard thing, the one thing that I want to give him credit for is considering his size, stature, and it's going to be an uphill battle for him, I think, for his whole career, right? Because of that aspect of, you can't really change your height. But the thing that I do like about him, he's really athletic. He is a really athletic guard, and we've seen him in transition in the open floor do some things that kind of make your jaw drop. He's had some really, really nice dunks in transition, and let's say 6'3" is generous and he's really like 6'1". It's like this exactly, the shepherd steal breakaway into the windmill. That's a really, really athletic move to do in transition off one foot. Like that is a really, really sick thing. And so I just wanted to give him credit for that, where of course, being smaller is going to be tough for him, but I think he's already shown us that he can develop, like in terms of like his physique, as we've seen, Adu Thiero has gone through the same thing. DJ Wagner's gone through the same thing. And, Rob as well. If he can continue to work on his physique and have this type of athleticism, shot making, offensive volatility to his game, I think it's something that needs to be credited to him. Although he's small in stature, this type of athleticism, I do think, is really, really impressive.
He's super quick twitch and like explosive. And he's able to get the spots on the floor because of his quickness, that you're like, all right, like there's more here than just like a guy who is going to gun, which is why sometimes you're like, yeah, you didn't need to settle for that ball don't stop shot, but he is like really quick in transition. He'll grab and go, and like he's really rebounded the ball well. I think he's got like a 16.4 defensive rebounding percentage, which is really impressive for a guy that we're saying is like super small. And while he is super quick, like in this clip that we're playing against St. Joseph's, where he does take it coast to coast off the board, like he also has like super like slow to fast speed too, and he'll slow down and like he can decelerate a little bit, and play with different pace. It's not like it's weird because it's not like the smoothest like
Right.
pace that you've ever seen, like from a small guard. I think Malik Mack's pace this in this class is like I love his pace. He reminds me a little bit of Jalen Brunson. Rob's got like a weird pace where he'll go super fast and then it's like slow, and then he'll go super fast again, but it's like, I don't know, it doesn't have that same smoothness all the time, but it's arguably more effective, because he is so quick. So he does have a lot of positives when he does attack, and I think that's helped him as a playmaker, as well. But I do think that there are also finishing concerns, and that's where we see the size and the strength and stuff. Like, he needs to finish better at the hoop. I mean, he's 55% in the half court. And I think, it's more of like recent struggles, I would say, that he's kind of struggled at the rim, but like you see that he definitely, when he's in traffic, sometimes it could be an issue for him.
No, I agree, Corey. It's something that I was thinking about while you were talking. A lot of times when we have like smaller guards that are like quick, we use the term like, oh, he's a jitterbug. Rob, don't
Yeah.
take this the wrong way, but I think of you as more of like a water bug, because you do have some of that speed to you, but like you can also fly. When I've been in the Dominican Republic before, some of the more jarring, terrifying moments is like when I'll be in the bathroom and there's a water bug that essentially looks just like a cockroach that's just flying into your face, and you start to question life, right? Like, I paid all this money to be at this beautiful resort, and there's a cockroach flying in my face. But besides that point, Rob Dillingham is this type of guy, though. Like, Corey, the one that you played before, right? That little hesitation move, that wasn't pretty. Like, it was a really effective move, but neither of us would be like, if we were kids and we saw that move, neither of us would be going to like our driveway being like, oh, I want to try that move. Like, it didn't look the best, but it works and it's effective. And I think sometimes we can get too caught up in, I don't know, the minutia of basketball sometimes, and just sometimes you got to give a kid credit for working on his game, and you got to give a kid credit for developing in different areas that maybe weren't his strengths. But the last point that you made about finishing at the rim, being strong, finishing through contact, ball security, right? Which is something that I like to think about a lot. And I think a lot of that's because, New York City background for both of us, but, New York City guards have always been notorious about being so physical going to the rim, whether, recently Lance Stevenson or Telfair or Marbury or Strickland or Kenny Anderson or whatever. There's always been an emphasis of, you've got to be a small, strong guard that protects the ball going all the way to the rim, and you got to finish amongst the trees. And I think, with Rob, though, Corey, I will say, I think he's got to get stronger and he's got to get better at finishing through contact, but he's got like a little asshole in him. Like,
Oh yeah,
he's feisty. And I
he
think
is.
sometimes that spirit, the anger and the frustration and the emotional side of players can overcome physical limitations as well sometimes. Like, there was a moment in that North Carolina game where he got into someone's face, and you see it like every single game, even
He'll
that
tell
game against,
someone they're too small.
exactly, even that game against Penn, right? They're like winning by a good amount, and he starts getting like chirpy and kind of nasty with guys. I'm just like, that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
And us being New York guys, and we've played basketball before, although obviously you've played on a much higher level than me. It's okay. I've played on blacktop as well, but it's we know how physical you need to be, but also it's not just the physicality, it's the mentality and spirit. And I think Rob does have that, where of course he's going to lack some of that strength and he's going to continue to work on that. The feistiness and aggression that he has makes me a little bit more I'm a little bit more optimistic about him eventually getting better at it. But Corey, I'm with you in that at this point in his development, it is something we need to highlight as something he needs to continue to work on.
Yeah, he's got a little bit of like Mighty Mouse 2.0
Mm,
to him,
wow. Okay.
you know, a little bit.
Jesus.
Just I
Jesus.
granted different era, so but you know, he does. He's herky jerky. He could oddly be a bully at times, given his lack of strength. And I think when you are that size, sometimes like you need that little extra edge just to be able to do the things that you do and finish through contact and whatever. And like I say, he's at 55% this year on the whole in the half court. He's obviously a blaze in transition. I do think that sometimes like he settles too much going to the rim when I actually think that he has like a really effective floater because he has good
He does.
touch,
Yeah.
and he's only taken 6 floaters this year. So like I think this is like a shot he can get to way more often. And if he's able to mix up when he's like going all the way to the hoop, when he's firing away from three and like working on that in between game here, I think that's something he has to do a little bit more often because fellow Kentucky guard Emmanuel Quickly has made he's going to make himself a lot of money being able to get to that shot because especially Rob's got good vision.
Right.
And similarly to Quickly, like now in the NBA level, spaced floor, legit lob threat. Like now we don't know if you're going to go for the floater or not. And if that big has to step up to contest that floater, now the roller or the guy in the dunker spot or whatever come over and you can hit him for the lob too. So I think this is a shot he just needs to incorporate more often because it's there. He has it in his bag. He's got to go to it a little bit more often.
No, I agree, Corey. And also is something that we kind of mentioned in passing before, good mid-range shooter too, a guy that
Mm-hmm.
likes to shoot from the mid-range. And I think that's something that, we always talk about, right? An important part, the in-between game, as you mentioned. And in the NBA with more spacing, higher pick and roll stuff, he's going to have more of a runway to make some decisions, right? He's going to have the freedom to take, a lot of clean looks from the mid-range or attack all the way to the rim or throw up those floaters. And he's got good touch. And also, Corey, you bring up the Quickly thing. I even think he's a better passer than Quickly was at the same stage of their development. And so with Rob, and also a better athlete, I love IQ. I know I've been a big critic of his always, but IQ's a really good player and is, developed into a really strong third guard. And I think Dillingham could even be that or better, even just once again, because just athleticism is God-given and he has that athleticism, which I think is awesome, but also he is a good shooter, as we highlighted at the top, and a guy with good offensive instincts. It's just, sometimes those instincts, this is what I think, Corey, and I just talked about this, right? Like, I think there's this weird fusion that happens sometimes with his instincts plus his emotions plus like chip on the shoulder. And then I think when those three combine and create the perfect storm, shout out to Mark Wahlberg, George Clooney, these things can get a little messy for him and leads to, maybe not the best decisions. However, once again, he's a young man. And I think he's going to continue to, that's Jesus Christ. I just said young man. Weird. God damn it. That's the most washed thing I've ever said on our pod, but it's okay. We'll move on. But no, Rob is a guy that I think when he can really harness that energy and start to kind of, think, more with his head rather than his heart at times, I think we're going to see a really interesting player. But of course, none of that is guaranteed. So,
But I also think he is, to his credit, done like a really good job of doing that. And I think when you look at his turnover percentage, it's 11%, compared to that play, assist percentage in the 30s right now, and just his like willingness. Like I would have thought, and the reason I was lower on him, be like, all right, he's gonna be a ball stopper.
yes,
And there was a part of me that was kind of holding out hope just because Kentucky does love running guards like him, off movement and floppy actions and stuff. And like, I think given the fact that he can shoot it like that and he's comfortable shooting off movement and stuff, there was always a path to success in that system where like we're seeing a guy like DJ Wagner struggle because he doesn't have that same ability. But to Rob's credit, I feel like instead of being a ball stopper, he's a guy who like is willing to most of the time make really quick decisions. And like, I think this play right here is like a really good example of that because, this is the type of quick decisions and unselfish play that's like contagious, little like give, go, and give back to the big. And like, I don't know, it's really slick. And I think that he's been really, really willing to not only just make like flashy passes when he gets in the paint, but he's just like willing to be a good teammate and play like a really unselfish brand of basketball that I think has allowed him to actually stay on the floor, because I was really worried about him after Global Jam kind of being the player that I expected. But now, like, he's making one more passes to different guys, right? Like, he's doing all of the things that you want to do, that you're like, all right, he is also going to be able to play in a system, even if he is not the system in and of itself. And given the fact that I don't know if he has that same like Trae Young engine of a team type thing to his game, the fact that he is willing to just kind of play the nuanced, like unselfish team game, I think is something that is going to benefit him a lot. And also, maybe it's better that he doesn't have the Trae Young engine to his game thing, because like, I don't know, what's the ceiling on that kind of player? And maybe in a smaller role where you let Rob be Rob, like he can be really effective in a way that you don't have to build your team around him, but he's an important piece of it.
Corey, I think when all is said and done, it's going to be really interesting to see Rob play. Okay, we're going to do Reed Shepherd soon, but they play really well off of each other.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I think that needs to be noted. And it's going to be interesting to see him play without Reed Shepherd next season on some NBA team, because they have got great synergy. And there's something about them playing together that makes both of them better. Which kind of speaks to your point, Corey, where it might be a thing where we end up looking at these two guards kind of like how we looked at Tyrese Maxey and Emmanuel Quickly coming out together, right? Like two guys, both first round picks, both ending up becoming solid NBA guards. And Maxey's obviously all-star level now, but two guys that can really play at the NBA level at a high level. And I think with Rob, Corey, I think it's really important to note that what you said about, him growing, or maybe not growing, well, okay, we could say both, but him showing more of the passing stuff and also growing as a passer, I think was a really big surprise for us considering what we saw last year. But also, like, it's hard to kind of pinpoint for sure where that's coming from. It could be a lot of different things. It could be coaching. It could be playing with Reed. It could be a lot of different things, right? But it's definitely been a positive for him. And it's been something that has been delightful to watch. That play that you showed before, the little give and go, back and forth passing stuff, that looked like late 2000s, 2010s prime Barcelona tiki-taka football. Like, that's what that looked like. It was awesome stuff, right? So I think if Rob can continue to grow and continue to tap in now, but Corey, it's so interesting though, because at the top you also mentioned how in December it's fallen off a little bit, right? But at the same time, people will then come at us and be like, "Hey guys, we're talking about a 2-month sample size. You want to relax?" And if to that we'd say, "Okay, cool," right? And we'd be totally okay with that. And Corey, who knows? Maybe in January he has another lights out month, and then February a bad month. This stuff happens, right? But I think what is important though is the flashes have been good, and at least he has flashes where some guys don't even give us flashes. And that pass right there, right off of kind of like, he was kind of stuck in the air, but throws a really nice weak side pass to the corner to Reeves for the 3. Still, that's a pass that some guys may not make,
And he has the creativity and like the improvisational skills to do it, and the willingness to do it. So it's like, it's a skill, and he draws that pressure. Like the defense is collapsing there because like they know he's a threat to shoot the ball. So like it opens these things up. Like that's going to be there for him at the next level too. And I think like totally agree. Like him and Reed, unbelievable synergy. Like probably the best out of like any backcourt in college basketball this year. Just from a like these two guys just get each other type perspective.
Right.
But I also think that like he has had really great synergy with Trey Mitchell.
Yes.
And in the pick and pop game, and like, at the next level, you put him in a system with a big that could space the floor. I think that'll work, like, so I think that he's just a guy who is bought in to the team. He is playing with other guys that are good at basketball too, and are willing to also play in that style, and it's contagious, and he's bought in. And I think he probably saw like, hey, like I might have to go to a different school next year after Global Jam if I don't change what I'm doing. After Global Jam, I was like, I don't like this dude might not be in the rotation, like halfway through the year, but he's come out, bought in, and he's been awesome on the offensive side of the floor. And hopefully this 4-game stretch for him is just kind of an outlier part of the year, and the I don't know if he's going to 50-50 shooting splits or whatever, but like he goes back to knocking down shots at a higher clip, taking better shots, and becoming the playmaker that he showed the potential to be.
No, I agree, man. These hook passes to Trey Mitchell, awesome.
Yeah,
like
awesome.
really nice. Trey Mitchell was a grad school transfer, right? Good, playing well for them. But no, I'm with you, man. I think Rob is a guy we're gonna have to. He's a guy that like we're really, really gonna have to continue to monitor just because of the volatility. Like month to month, he might change. But once again, like I'm not afraid of the volatility, which is why I pushed him up my board so much, because I just like the fact that he's trying stuff. And Corey, the word that you used before, like him buying in, I think is really important. And I think if he's going to show this and show this type of buy-in at Kentucky under Coach Cal, then you have reason to be excited about his outlook on the next level as well. A guy that you're going to believe will continue to buy in, and obviously he won't be perfect. He's going to be a guy that is going to be raw. You want to continue to develop, but if he's got this type of buy-in and he's going to show flashes like this and continue to grow into these skill sets, I've got no problem. I think I moved him into my lottery. So I think there's just too much there on the bone for you to, as you mentioned, right, in this class, to not have him in your lottery just because we're kind of looking for stars here and looking for guys to be solid NBA rotational guys. And if Rob can, show off this type of play style and with his aggression and athleticism and all that stuff, hard not to put him in that range.
Totally. Let's quickly talk about the defense, because ultimately it's like that's the thing. It's like, can he stay on the floor, right? What have you thought about his defense?
In baseball, you have 5-tool guys. Rob Dillingham, not a 5-tool guy, in my opinion, was what I wrote down. I think, and look, Corey, I didn't want to kill him and say I thought he was a terrible defender, because I think, like you mentioned, Corey, he has shown signs of life. And the biggest thing is what I talked about before is that like mentality. He has moments where he's like really feisty on the defensive side of the ball, and he shows fight, and he like, it's not just simply like showing fight, but he's like showing fight to be in the right spots, which I thought was really cool. Even there, he's reading the play, makes a good jump on the ball, showing some aggression in the passing lanes as well. It's just, he's not the longest guy. I haven't seen any wingspan stuff with him, but clearly not the longest guy. Not the biggest shoulders, small guy still, even with the weight gain, mass gain. And in the NBA, the guys get bigger and stronger and faster. And, he's going to have to continue to develop on this end of the floor for him to not be called, a one-way guy. Because I think right now, at this point in his development, you would be hard-pressed to say that defense is like a strength of his. But once again, like he's shown fight and he's shown like the willingness to defend, but he's got to continue to grow. He's got to continue to get stronger. And in my opinion, I think he also needs to get a little bit more discipline, because I thought he had some wild moments on the defense side as well.
Yeah, I agree. I do think that, he's disruptive, and the steal percentage is like a really great sign, like being over 3%. He even has like a half a block percentage, which is, given who he is, good enough right now. But, he's been good on digs, and sometimes, that does get him out of position. So like there is an element of like the gamble to it. I like how you called him feisty. I think that is the right word. I think that he's like a guy who has been like pretty good chasing guys off screens. Like he stays connected. He's quick, and he's like slithery. And that allows him to also like get over defense of screens and whatnot, and like, be feisty. But ultimately, I think this possession here is like the ultimate, like what is Rob Dillingham, like just really great ISO defense, able to stay in front, right, in a guy's shirt, crowding his space, but maybe he's just too little.
Damn. It's kind of depressing, but yes, Corey. And really quickly, Corey, I did want to say the point that you made about him on Diggs is really good because he comes so quickly. Like
Yeah.
he's really good at like feigning like he's not gonna come, and then he comes really quick, and then he's got some pretty good hands on him too. But Corey, this possession is a great example of what we're talking about. Like he is small. Like there's no way we can't deny it, can't hide from it. It is what it is. But there's the feistiness, there's the fight, there's a desire to stay in front of his man, keep him in front, keep contesting. But God, what can you do about that, right? And if it's against Jalen Brunson in the NBA or even a Dame Lillard or whoever like that, that's a really tough
But I don't
proposition
even
for him.
know if I'm worried necessarily about him guarding those guys. It's like,
Sure, sure,
what happens when he gets switched on to Paul
right,
George?
right.
And it's just like they'll just rise up. And that's the thing. It's like, are they just going to target this dude on switches?
Initially, they will.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be an uphill battle for him, and that's the reality of the situation. So, like, everything that we said on the offense, like, it's got to hit because, again, like defensively, I thought he gives good effort. He's feisty, like he's willing to show a little bit of that asshole that you mentioned earlier. It's just like there are physical limitations. He isn't the longest dude ever, and for sometimes as much effort as you put in, sometimes good offense is better than good defense. And it's just going to be hard for him to contest, when he does get switched on to like those bigger wings. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. I like Rob. He's been, a guy who has been fun to watch this year and just see develop and grow his game because there was an outcome for him that was not this. And he's really given himself a shot to be like a legit lottery guy in this class.